Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday at 9 or 9:05 or 9:10. Whenever I get here, we have Treasure Coast Solutions. So we don't have any solutions for the Treasure Coast, unfortunately, so it's kind of a misnomer, but we will at least talk about problems because that's always a good thing. Now, for any of you who have been unfortunate enough to roll onto the channel right now and haven't heard the show before, I feel sorry for you, but my name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a local CPA and an ex-banker with the emphasis on X. And the show is, since I'm paying for the time, it's whatever I want it to be. But it is largely just a show about, it's not a political show necessarily. It's not a show about financial planning. It's none of those kind of things. Just really a show to air out some kind of some issues that may affect you in the future, some of the global issues, some of the local issues, some of the national issues, state issues, those kind of things, and to kind of talk about some of those things and what impact they have, because sometimes it's not always obvious that the economics of a transaction. I'm always amazed at how difficult it is sometimes to follow a transaction to its ultimate end, because sometimes we end up getting lost in the economics of a transaction. We end up getting lost in a what we think is the final result, and in reality it's not. And economics is kind of an interesting shell game because it is a situation where it's always kind of fun to see who's actually paying. It's when I had my first economics classes in college and those kind of things, and macro and micro and all of that. And, I remember just thinking that, gee, this is just one big shell game. Everything moves around. You got to find out where the P ends up, and turns out, it ends up not where you think. So anyway, that's kind of what we're talking about this morning, and welcome any kind of contribution. If you want to call in, 220-9788, 220-WSTU is the number in the studio. And as I always say, it's the number for a lot of our shows here. That's the studio number. And we have a lot of shows on WSTU that you can participate in, including our condo show on Mondays. So, feel free. The only thing we ask is that it's just like the condo show. You don't have to give your real name. But we do ask that you keep it as civil as possible, because unfortunately, the delay button is not really as good as it should be here at WSTU. So we need to make sure that we have plenty of time to bleep you out because I know economics can do that to you. Politics doesn't, but economics can really get you fired up sometimes, and those words can come out. So any type, if you've got a comment, and if you happen to be in the field of economics, you happen to be a professor, and you hear me say something wrong, that's okay. Don't bother. No, you can call in and correct me. I'm the first to tell you that I do not, as an accountant, very few of us as CPAs have, really believe much in economics. So we don't believe in the term economic income. And so therefore, we may have a difference of opinion on some stuff, and I may be mistaken. So anyway, it's one of those kind of things where just we would do welcome some participation. And I was talking about the economics, and it's funny, it happens at the national level, it happens at the local level. Anybody that's joined me for some of these shows in the past knows that the one example I always use of the shell game in economics is the concept of corporate taxes. And, you hear people all the time talking about, let's tax the corporations. The corporations are not paying any tax. And so therefore, they're getting by. And so all we really need to do to pay for a lot of stuff is to tax these billion-dollar corporations who are faceless, and we can just do that without any problem. And that would be great if corporations actually could pay taxes, but the publicly traded corporations can't pay taxes. It's not that they don't, or that they're using any kind of tax deductions or tricks or anything like that. I mean, there are all of those. There's all of the social engineering that goes into the tax code and all of that. But it's not that I'm talking about, is that they cannot pay taxes because taxes are a cost. So the only person that pays taxes in a corporate world is the shareholder. The shareholder is the one that bears that cost because, as I've said before, in a corporate situation, a corporation has certain uh, components of its income from an economic standpoint. And one of those components is its labor cost. One of its components is its materials costs. Um, and one of its components is its tax cost. And all of those are costs. So if you increase those, then what is going to happen is you're going to reduce profits to the shareholder, not to the corporation, because ultimately it's the shareholder who's going to get the reduced profits. Because what's going to happen? If the corporation's profits go down, then their price of their share is going to go down because they're no longer producing the profits to justify that type of price on the stock. So if their profits go down, then, or their perceived profits go down, but if their profits go down because their costs have gone up, then what's going to happen is they're going to produce a lower return to the shareholder. Now you say, well, okay, well, that's the shareholder. That's a big shareholder. They got lots of money. No, because that's not what's going to happen. See, that's what I say is the shell game. Because you'd think, okay, the shareholder is going to get a lesser return. And as a result of that, they're the one that's going to bear the cost. So instead of Amazon being $2,000 a share, it'll be $1,900 a share. And if anybody can afford Amazon, then they can afford to take a $100 hit. Nope, that's not what's going to happen. That person is paid $2,000 for their shares of Amazon. And when it goes down to $1,900, they've got a negative return on their investment, and they're immediately going to take action. And because it's a publicly traded stock, that is as simple as picking up the phone or going online and saying, sell Amazon, buy eBay. I don't know. It's as simple as that. Okay. Get rid of them, buy a competitor. All right. And if that competitor is paying tax, then sell their stock and buy somebody overseas that's in a different tax bracket, that's in a different situation. Because you can do that now. You don't have to buy something that's on the New York Exchange. You can buy something that is on the New York Exchange that's taxed in, Ireland, like Big Pharma. You want to own Big Pharma, they don't pay much. They've found a way to reduce their tax costs. They have all their patents in Ireland so that they don't pay any tax on the royalties. So bottom line is you got to look through the transaction to see ultimately who's going to pay it, because who writes the check or who it seems like on paper is going to write the check is not necessarily the person that's paying. Or not paying. So what happens, like I said, in the corporate world is that shareholder makes a decision to go someplace else. Well, you can say that greedy shareholder, they should pay their fair share. And there again, that sounds good. If we're talking about Gates, yeah, Bill Gates should pay his fair share. And so that's who we think of when we think of, we think of all of these, these big corporations. We think of the person that was the founder, that was behind the corporation, and we think of them as being the person that's suffering. And so we say, no big deal. They should pay their fair share. Well, if they were the majority of that, then, maybe that would work. But the problem is they're not. The bulk of the owners of stocks in this country today are IRA accounts, pension plans, retirement accounts, 401ks, and individual accounts by individual investors who are just trying to save for retirement. So okay, well, let's just take more money from them so they can't save for retirement. Well, what happens then? What if we do that? What if we take that money from those IRA accounts or the 401ks? Because they're not paying taxes anyway on that stuff, some of them. So what if we just take it away from them? Well, what's going to happen there? Somebody's going to pay for those people when they retire, right? Because we're not going to put them out on the street. We're not going to allow those people to live out on the street because they didn't put money in their 401k, or it got taken away from them to pay current taxes. So something's going to happen, and we're going to have to do something to compensate for that, because now they're not going to have the money to retire. So, interestingly enough, this new spending bill that just went through has a provision in it from a tax standpoint to tax more IRAs, to force people to take money out of their IRAs sooner. Because they got to pay for this stuff someplace. And they've decided they're going to take it out of retirees, existing retirees. And the way they're going to do that is, in one place they allowed you to postpone your minimum distribution. So you'd say, okay, well, that saves you money because you don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to pull the money out and pay taxes. So in one place, they've allowed you to delay that. But on the other hand, what they're doing is not allowing you to transfer that IRA account to the next generation as easily. You have to pay tax sooner. So they're going to get the tax from your beneficiaries, because they've decided it's okay for you to have your money longer, but you can't give it to your kids so that they have a retirement. No, that wouldn't be good, right? Because, and that makes sense, because I figured it out as I'm looking at this, and from an economic standpoint, you can figure it out. It's very easy. The answer is anybody under 40's got to pay for everything. And I've decided that since Mike Thomas is under 40, he's paying for every single thing that I do. He's paying for my Social Security. He's going to pay for my health care. If I decide to go back for college, he's going to pay for that. He's paying for everything. So I'm good with that. He's going to pay every single thing that I expect him to. And he's away from a mic right now, so he can't talk. So he would agree with me if it were the case. He would agree with me that he is going to pay for everything.
I will pay for everything. It'll be the best my money can buy.
Jeez, I'm going to die. I have no health care
immediately.
That's what I thought. Oh no. But yeah, so here it is. But in all seriousness, Mike is a young guy with a family, and we're asking that generation to pay for every single thing we've got right now. So when you follow the bouncing ball is ending up basically in a place that most of us don't realize and don't want. And the funny thing is that there are a lot of people out there, Mike's age, not Mike necessarily, but a lot of people out there Mike's age, who don't realize that all of the free stuff that some of these people are talking about is going to end up being paid by them, because the people that talk about free stuff always talk about the wealthy or the corporations or the faceless person out there who's raking in the money. And the fact of the matter is that is not who pays. It is never going to be the person that pays. Those are also the people that, first of all, they're a very small portion of them, but they're also the people that can flee this country quickly without, like, for example, I have a friend, a client that just recently moved and became a full-time citizen of Puerto Rico. Why? No tax. Now, Mike and I probably can't move to Puerto Rico. First of all, my Spanish is kind of rusty. And second of all, I don't know if I can do taxes in Puerto Rico, and there is none. So I don't have a job.
I have a genuine question.
Yes.
Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. Why wouldn't we be able to move there?
We could move there. That's right. Just like this individual did. But for most of us, we don't have the kind of job or the kind of flexibility, because we have to work. So, for example, you and I could move to Puerto Rico, but then it would be a long commute to come in here on Mondays and Wednesdays for me to do this show, right?
For you.
And it's already a long, yeah, right. It's already a long commute, right? I have to come from the second floor sometimes. Now I'm down on the first floor. So I have to come from the first floor across the hall to here. And that takes me 7 or 8 minutes.
And you're still late.
And I'm still late. So think if I'm coming from Puerto Rico, right? So it'd be a slow boat. But anyway, that's China. But anyway, but seriously, that's the thing. Wealthier people can choose where they want to live, where they want to pay taxes, and where they want to go. That's not an option. So you can't nail them down unless you can force them to stay someplace and pay taxes. And you can't, because they can leave. And for example, in my business as a CPA, you can call me up and I can move every dime of your future income offshore, so that legally, so that in the future, the recipient of that income would be someone who does not have to pay U.S. tax, and that is being done daily, and it takes a little bit of money, probably $30,000-$40,000, and some annual fees of probably $6,000 or $7,000. So, it probably doesn't make sense for most of us to be paying that kind of money, but it's possible. And when you're looking at somebody charging you $1 billion in taxes and you can save that, then you do. Most of us may remember back in the day when Facebook was going public, and that was the big startup. And I don't know if I don't know, Mike, if you remember the guy. I think his name was Xander. What was the guy's name? He was one of the partners. He was actually from Spain originally, I think.
Okay.
And when with the numbers they were talking about when Facebook was going to go public, and the amount of taxes that they would have to pay as a result of going public, he decided to move to Spain or to someplace. He moved out of the U.S. He was going to sacrifice or give up his U.S. Because his U.S. Citizenship. Now, when you do that, you have to pay tax on the fair market value of your assets at the time that you leave the country. So let's say I want to go to the Cook Islands. I'm going to move all my assets to the Cook Islands, or then to Switzerland or someplace like that. So I'm going to get rid of my U.S. citizenship, and I'm going to move to one of those places. Well, when I do that, they take a snapshot of the fair market value of everything I own worldwide, and I'm going to pay tax on that. All right, but it's tax one time, and then I'm done, and then I don't have to pay those taxes anymore. So in his situation, he made the decision that paying, a few $1 million based on an estimated price was going to save him more money than if he paid it on, the ultimate price, because he thought Facebook stock was going to go way up, which initially it didn't, but it has done pretty well. And so, and I think they got a pretty good price when it sold out to whoever owns Facebook now. It's just some corporation. But anyway, so he ended up doing that, and saved millions of dollars in taxes because he had millions of dollars. And so if you can pay somebody like me, or, any of the other guys out there that do that kind of work, we can find a way to legally avoid taxes. And it's tax avoidance, not tax evasion. So you don't go to jail for that. Now, if you do it wrong, you go to jail. So because then it becomes tax evasion, and that is still illegal in the United States. And that's how many people are prosecuted by tax cases. So anyway, it's an interesting thing. So like I said, it's kind of it's a big thing, a big shell game that you got to watch the hands quickly, and you got to, when the shells stop, you still got to be looking to see where the shells are moving to, because in economics, they're probably still moving. Stuff is still happening. People are making decisions in a capitalistic system. They're making decisions all the time because they have the ability to allocate their own resources. Now, if you take that ability away from them, a communist country, for example, where they can't allocate their own resources, then that's a different story. But there again, most people are going to abandon that system because it eliminates or reduces their potential to make an income. And I don't care what you say. I've got clients in China. I've got clients in other places. Don't have anybody in Russia, but I do have clients in China. And and that is so far away from the US's economic system that you just, I mean, there, you got to remember that's a communist country. They control everything, and they control what happens there, and they determine the allocation of resources, including how much of those resources go to government people to grease the wheels, which is allowed over there, by the way. Um, how much of that takes place? So you can't compare a free enterprise economic system, even if it has restrictions on it, to China. China is way, way away from that. For example, I have a situation not too long ago where a client um, decided to close down a business because the business had not made money for 10 years. So they decided, look, given this as long as we can. So they notified the Chinese government that they were going to close their plant. So the government said to him, you need to stay open and pay the people another year, which they did. They stayed open, paid the people another year. So then it came time to close down. And the Chinese government said, nope, you still got to pay them another year. And my client said, no, we're not doing that. We can't afford to do that. We don't have the money to do that. So what happened was, so you say, well, what can the Chinese government do? Well, this was a U.S. citizen. So what would you do if you were a terrorist organization? I would kidnap the person and then hold them for ransom, right? I mean, that's what happens in the world today. People get held for ransom, whether it's political ransom, they threaten to kill them, or they do kill them in exchange for a political outcome, or it's economic ransom. They hold the person hostage, and they charge them. They charge a ransom, and they use that ransom to fund their terrorist activities. Well, China is a terrorist country, so they generally follow the same principles. We just haven't declared it a terrorist country. But when you're killing 1 million Muslims in a year as ethnic cleansing, you're a terrorist organization. So let's just deal with it and say China is a terrorist organization. But so what do? Well, do they actually kidnap a U.S. citizen? No, they're smarter than that. That would get an immediate retaliation by the United States government. So how do I get that person to pay? Well, here's how you get the person to pay. That person has a visa. Have you ever noticed that in any communist country, this was true in Cuba, your passport isn't good enough. You also have to have a visa. Why is that? Because the government controls the visa. Well, people say, well, yeah, so they control who comes into their country. No, they control who comes into their country and who goes out of their country, because you have to have that same visa to get out of the country. So if I'm China, how do I kidnap a U.S. citizen? I revoke their visa. They're in the country and they can't get out. And unless they pay me or somehow get money over there, I'm not letting them go. So that's what happens. That is kidnapping at the high levels. That's how it happens from a country that calls itself a member of NATO. That's the kind that happens. Why do you think the people in Hong Kong were concerned about being pulled back to mainland China to have for disciplinary hearings? Because first of all, there are no trials, so you don't have a fair trial. You go back to somebody who tells you what the outcome is. And then what happens? If you don't like the answer, you can't respond, or you don't respond, or you don't have the money to respond, they revoke your visa and you can't go back. You can't go out of the country. You can't leave. And then they have control over you, either through the corporation that you may be an officer of, and they maybe can get that corporation to pay, or whatever. It is high-level bribery and high-level extortion, but it's done legally, supposedly. And that's what happens. So that's why I say, you got to look at what happens in some of this stuff. And there is a big difference between what happens in a communist system and what happens in a capitalistic system. In a communist system, generally all of the resources move before they become socialist or communist. They move ahead of time. They've seen it happen. Um, there's a reason why there's a reason why that people that are here in the United States that have come from um, oppressive countries, economically oppressive countries, as well as politically oppressive countries, why they come here and why they risk their life to climb a wall or to swim a river or to do whatever they need to do, or to stow away on an airplane on a wheel well, or whatever they need to do to get to the United States. And why is that? Why would somebody do that? Because the alternative is far, far worse. And the economic alternative is far, far worse. And the political reality is far, far worse. So that's kind of what happens. And it's interesting. So, but I digress. as most of you know, I tend to get off track sometimes, and so as a result, being the entrepreneur that I am, I just built a new set of tracks. So that's why the show kind of free flows in the morning, because depending upon which way the tracks are going, I end up in a different place than I anticipated. So let me pull it back into the station here and talk a little bit about economics. Again, I talked about it at the international level and why it affects you, or the national level through the publicly traded companies. It's also why I've said that the publicly traded companies are not necessarily a true indication of how the country is doing. Small business generates jobs because in a small business world, the small business owner does pay the taxes. They can't sell their shares. They can't call up their broker and say, hey, could you sell 100 units of Mark Breckbill PLLC certified public accountants? I want to buy 100 units of Carr Riggs Ingram. They won't let me do that. I can't do that. Carr Riggs Ingram isn't a publicly traded company. I'm not a publicly traded company. So if all of a sudden I've gotten myself into a situation where the government is going to tax me more, I can't get out of that by selling my stock and buying a company that's say a CPA firm in Puerto Rico. I can't immediately do that. I could in the long run. So what I could do is immediately put my firm up for sale, and I could then try to find a firm in Puerto Rico to buy, and then I could do that. But that might take a year. It might take longer. So in the interim, I'm going to pay taxes. I can't move freely as the big corporations can. So the small business owner does pay the brunt of the taxes. And they also create most of the jobs, and they also benefit from tax decreases. So that's why in the short run, small business does tend to benefit directly. They typically, it doesn't necessarily all go in their pocket like it does at the corporate level. It's going into some investor's pocket as cash or as a return on their investment. But it does go, in the small business world, it does go into, a lot of times, into buying more inventory, creating more jobs, hiring people, those kind of things. So it goes into boosting other costs. And so their profit might stay the same, but they're able to reduce their tax cost. And when they reduce their tax cost, instead of that flowing down sometimes directly to the investor as profits, sometimes it does on a small business, but that might not be cash. We've talked about that on the show before, that income and cash are not the same thing. They are if you get a salary and you get a paycheck, those are the same thing. If you're a major corporation, you're paying dividends and they're getting a dividend payment and they're paying tax on it, that's the same thing. But in a small business that's an S Corp or an LLC taxed as a partnership, one of those types of entities, they're called pass-through entities. You personally pay the tax. Whether you have the cash to do that or not, you're responsible for paying the cash. Well, most of the time, small business doesn't have the cash. Why? Well, because we went partying at Vegas and we had a great time and we spent it all out there. Nope, that's not what happens. Actually, that's probably the corporate executives. No, what actually happens is that we hired more people so we could do more work, so we could grow our business, or we had to buy more materials because we need more inventory because we got more jobs we're doing, or We have to have money because we've done the work and we've paid all of our people. We've billed the customer, but the customer hasn't paid yet because they have 30-day terms or 45-day terms or 60-day terms. So we're still waiting for the cash to come in. And while that cash is coming in and that number gets bigger and bigger every month, why does it get bigger and bigger every month? Why don't you collect it? It gets bigger and bigger every month because my sales get bigger and bigger every month. If I'm doing $1.2 million in sales a year and it takes 30 days to pay, I've got $100,000 in receivables, even if they're paying according to terms. I've got 100,000. If I double my sales to 2.4 million, I now have $200,000 in receivables that I'm waiting for, just under normal terms. Where did I get the money to finance that extra 100,000? Good point. I didn't. I have to do it out of profits, which means I have to take the cash that I have to pay tax on. I have to take that cash and I have to put it into my cash account to support my receivables so I can pay my bills. And that's why small business, does bear the brunt of taxes. And that's why a tax reduction has more effect in terms of creating jobs, because small business creates those jobs. They don't necessarily have the choice that the bigger corporations do in terms of having cash and what they do with the cash. I mean, you want to see the difference. Look at the piles of cash that the major corporations, Apple, for example, look at the piles of cash that Apple had overseas, so they didn't have to pay tax on it before the Trump tax law, and they brought it back in and paid some tax. Look at how much money some of these major corporations have. They have to justify that. Most of them justify it by saying that they're looking at acquisitions, so they have to have the cash available to acquire other companies, which again is not always a good thing as it relates to jobs and everything else. So anyway, so that's what's going on at that level. It's small business is on the front line in that. And that's why I say Wall Street isn't necessarily a good indication of what's happening at Main Street at all. And I think Main Street is still struggling a little bit. Not that the jobs aren't there, not that the work isn't there. It is, and profits are up. But what's not up is cash flow. Cash flow is not up because we're growing rapidly. The recession sucked a lot of cash out of the system for small business to stay alive. And now it's the reverse. They need to put a bunch of money into the system, and that money isn't there. It isn't there in the form of their primary residences or their homes, because many of them either are at this stage in life they don't want to borrow against their house because they don't want to risk losing it like they almost did during the recession, or as they did during the recession. The cash isn't there from the banks because the banks aren't doing the traditional lending that they used to do, not in the levels that they did before, not in the manner that they did before. And so what's happening is it's the cash side of the business world, the small business world, that is dragging back the economy right now, and will continue to. I don't see anything on the horizon that would indicate that is changing. Not in the short run, maybe 5, 6, 7 years down the road, it may. But right now, it's a psychology that's built into the system that's become the way of life from previous recession. There are procedures, policies, and things that have just become the way banks do things. Even if they're not required to do it that way anymore, it's become part of their process, and they don't change process easy. So realistically, I have said before, I'm not comfortable with the economy, not because all the things that President Trump has done weren't good. I think a lot of them were good, and a lot of them have resulted in creations of jobs and some things like that. But what I'm talking about is that there is a portion of that which hasn't been fixed yet. And I'm hoping that that's going to be, in 2020 or wherever, that's going to be the next goal, is to solve the financing issues for small business. And the answer to that is not to give it more to the government. That is the problem right now, is that the source of financing right now, because of the way the system is set up, is largely through the banks, but guaranteed by the Small Business Administration, which means it's the government making the loan, really, because they're guaranteeing it. Or on the residential side, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are government agencies. So in the home market, which of course, as many of you know, real estate here and around the United States is a significant factor in the economy, up or down. That is impacted and controlled strictly by the government. And then on the business side, you've got the SBA is the only source of conventional financing, really. We have some private hedge funds, some equity funds, and things like that out there that are providing some financing, but that's getting more expensive and more difficult to get. Why? Because the government has targeted those. Their profits now are being taxed at a higher rate. They're not allowed some of the deductions or benefits that they were. The whole concept of carried interest and all of that. That was something that was hit hard in these private equity funds and these hedge funds, with the idea that they should pay more taxes. But you see, if they pay more taxes, that's less money for them to lend to small business and others to make the economy go. Already, those guys don't generally loan money on the business side. They do some startup money. They do some venture capital, but they don't do a lot of loans unless it's real estate. Now, there's huge real estate funds out there, but those are being, contracted somewhat because there's not as much money out there on the equity side. So all of this stuff bothers me. It's the stuff that, when I look at the market and I look at the free market system, and you see a portion of the free market system that is not a free market, it concerns me in terms of what's going to happen in the future, because it's too dependent upon the government to survive. I can tell you this: if the government tomorrow chokes off and restricts SBA and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the economy will collapse. There's no question in my mind. The only thing that's keeping the economy going right now is, and the banks are not going to step into the process and take on that risk. There's no reason for them to. So, it's something to keep an eye on, because depending upon who controls that, and keep in mind, the executive branch controls those entities, that if all of a sudden the support for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the support for the SBA is diminished, and that is very easy to do. The government already has a mechanism in place to do that. For example, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac cannot loan money to buy a home that would result in a jumbo loan. In other words, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are restricted to the amount of money they can lend to any one borrower for the purchase of a home. If you go above that, you have to get a jumbo loan. Now, there's a market for the jumbo loans, but those rates are higher and the borrowing standards are higher. It takes better credit and it's more difficult to get done, particularly as a result of Dodd-Frank, where it's harder to foreclose on those people. So that market is what they call thin. There's not as many players in it. It's not as active as you would like. It's good, but it's nowhere near as active as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So if I'm the government and I want to limit my exposure, what do? I reduce that number. I change that number and reduce the amount. That number varies around the country based on the average housing prices, but all I have to do is across the board reduce that number or cap that number, and I will shut off a large portion of the market. And I will shut off some economies pretty quickly. You think about California, for example, where it costs you $400,000 to buy a garage. If all of a sudden Fannie Mae isn't going to fund that, think what's going to happen to the housing market in California. SBA, it's the same thing. SBA generally guarantees. They don't make loans directly. Most of the time, it's not a direct loan, so they're not loaning it. What they do is a bank, let's say TD Bank, they go out and they have a borrower, a customer, say me, and I go into them and I want to borrow money. Well, they evaluate me to determine whether or not they'll lend me money, and they determine that they won't. then I'm not eligible for SBA. They cannot make an SBA loan if they determine that I'm not eligible to borrow money under their normal lending standards. Now, TD Bank is a big bank, and so their lending standards are pretty broad. And so a lot of people can fit into that. There's not real low, but TD Bank can't go out and find, a high risk loan and say, look, this is paying 16% interest. Let's do this loan. We'll get the SBA to guarantee 90% of it. So we've only got 10% risk. At 16%, if they pay for a year, we've made our money back and a nice return. Let's just do it. They can't do that. All right. They're prohibited from doing that. That's a restriction. Well, now if I'm a small business and many small business owners, first of all, don't have high credit scores because of the amount of times that their credit is pulled, the amount of things that they have to guarantee, all of those kind of things. Many times they don't have high credit scores, even if they've got good income. So, all of a sudden, more and more businesses may fall into that category where they don't meet the requirement. And so not only are you not eligible for bank loans, but you're not eligible for SBA as well. But let's say that I do meet the criteria and TD Bank would make me the loan because I meet their loan criteria. But they've decided that, you know what, we've got enough CPA firms that we've loaned money to. Let's do this SBA. We want to loan money to CPAs, but we don't want that concentration of risk. So let's do these with SBA so that we can limit that risk. So that's what they do. So then SBA guarantees 90% of the loan. Again, that depends on whether it's a 7A loan or a 504 loan is real estate, but generally it's the 7A and they're doing that, or there's the express loan, which they can do. And that's where a lot of the lending is coming today. And you may not even know it because your lender may have done it, may do it just as part of the process. They may make that decision once they've evaluated your loan. So you come in and you want to borrow money to buy out a partner, you sit down with them, they determine, we're going to do that. But you know what? In this line of business, we're going to do SBA. And so then they have you fill out an SBA application. Typically, if you've done it right, they're a direct lender and they can do that pretty quickly. So that's what's happening. That's what's going on. And that's what I worry about because that is very, very thin and there are very few players out there. And if all of a sudden, for example, let's say SBA, I can borrow money to buy let's say I have a building that I want to put my business in. All right. I can go borrow money. I can use either 504, I can use 7A, but I could do a 7A loan. I can get a 25-year amortization, a 25-year loan potentially. I can probably get the rate fixed for a period of time, maybe 5 years, maybe longer. After that, the loan will vary at maybe prime plus 2.5. So I'm at 7.25% interest on that loan because SBA is doing it. And I only probably have to have 15% down. I don't have to have 20 or 25 or 30% down. So now all of a sudden to buy $1 million building, I have to have 150,000, not 400,000. So that means there's more people that might be able to do that, more businesses that might be able to do that because that threshold level is lower. That's because the SBA is making the loan, right? Let's say all of a sudden the SBA decides that they've made way too many loans to CPAs and the SBA is no longer going to guarantee CPA loans. All right. So now I go to buy my building. I can't go to the SBA. So what's going to happen? Well, my interest rate isn't going to be 7.25%, prime plus 2.5. It's not going to be 7.25%. It's not going to be, I'm probably not going to get a 30-year loan or 25. And I'm going to have some sort of penalties on it, and there's going to be certain qualifications, but more importantly, I'm not going to get away with 15% down. I'm going to have 30, maybe 35, maybe even 40% down, and I'm going to have rent rolls, and I'm going to have all kinds of things. It's going to have to appraise out and all of that, and there's fewer of those guys out there. So the bottom line is, I'm probably going to pay closer to 9%. It's probably going to be interest only. I'm probably not paying any principal. I'm probably only going to get the loan for a year. And then I'm going to have to refinance it again, which means more costs, means more fees, more points, all of those kind of things. So when you look at those costs, my borrowing costs will go from 7.5 or 7.25, with maybe a point, to 9.5 with maybe 2 points or 3 points. So I can't afford that building now. I don't have $400,000 down. That shuts off that portion of the market. That shuts off that business. Now, here's the thing that's sad about that. For most small business owners, that is their retirement. That building that they bought, that they used the company profits to pay for instead of leasing a space, that is their retirement income. That they're going to get that back when they sell the business. And in fact, it's probably going to have appreciated in value over that 25 or 30 years. And so you're going to get that money back. But that's way down the road. And now we've cut that off. So now what's going to happen? If you've been paying attention, Mike is going to pay, because now I don't have that retirement. I didn't sell that building for $1 million. I leased all my life. I sell my practice for $200,000. And because I have an extravagant lifestyle, Mike is going to have to make up the other $800,000 that I anticipated having at retirement. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate that once more.
I got you, Mark.
You do. You got my back.
Yeah.
So
No, you're covered.
at least until Friday. And it really is depressing. That
Yeah.
I like Evan. He's a nice guy. I mean, he seems like a really nice guy.
He's a very nice guy, but he's not going to pay for your medical bills.
He's not going to pay for my medical bills.
No.
He's going to help get you to pay for the medical bills.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that. We're on the same team here. But yeah, it should be exciting. It should be a good process. So anyway, that's kind of the stuff that I was going to talk about. I want to mention one more thing because I'm running out of time, but I want to now bring it into the local level. And I've talked about this before, but I wanted to mention how the same process works at the local level. This shell game that we talk about with economics. And what happens is at the local level, they've talked about putting meters in. I was talking to a shop owner the other day downtown, and it's because it is complicated. People don't really understand it. And they were saying, yeah, that sounds good. This is a shop owner that has a shop downtown. They're saying, we'll let these people that could afford to pay for it, and they will pay the $5. It's only $5. They'll pay the $5, and they'll go ahead and support parking downtown. And I said, now wait a minute. Okay, so they're going over to the restaurant, for example, and you think they're going to pay the $5? And they say, yeah, they got to put it in the meter. They'll use their card or whatever, and they'll pay. I said, they're the ones that will execute the transaction. You got to look beyond that to see who's going to pay. Who's going to pay for the transaction? Well, they're going to go into, let's say, Duffy's, and they're going to say to Duffy's, hey, I had a parking meter I had to pay for. What are you going to do? We'll comp you. We'll give you a credit against your bill for some or all of that parking. If you stay here and eat and you spend more than $20, we'll give you a $5 credit, or $25, we'll give you a $5 credit. Or they just raise their prices and they pass that through to the consumer. But they are paying it. They're going to ultimately pay it, because if they raise their prices, the person goes somewhere else. So the bottom line is that you got to look beyond. And here's the thing: that individual parking place without a meter on it or with a meter on it is worth about $10,000 to the business that it sits in front. So I'm not going to let that consumer go. I'm going to give them the $5 credit. So in the shell game we call economics in downtown Stuart, who's going to pay for the parking charges? It is going to be the small business shop owner in downtown Stuart. Once again, it is small business that pays. Now, small business needs to get wise and find Mike Thomas and get him to reimburse them, because Mike is the one that's going to pay for all of us downtown.
Checks in the mail.
Checks in the mail. Thanks. And that baby will bounce. I noticed that.
And you'll pay for the bounce.
I know. I noticed that you have new checks that are actually rubber now. You got so used to bouncing checks that they're actually rubber. So I thought that was pretty cool. I think I'm going to do that too. That seems logical to me in the whole process. Anyway, I don't know if you found it interesting this morning. I thought it was kind of fun, but if not, then don't tell anybody.
Spending other people's money is always fun.
It always is. And having you support me, Mike, is a good one. I do want to say, because this will be my last show with you here, I I am going to miss you. You are you're great. You're a great person to work with. You're a true professional, and I have enjoyed all of the time we've spent together. And I wish you the best in your life because you deserve it.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. Thank you.
No problem. We don't even have to get along all the time. I still love you.
Fair
All right. You're here listening to WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.